People always find it so funny that even though I've lived in the same place since I was born, there are roads probably only a couple of 100 meters away from my house that I've never been down. That wouldn't be a big deal if I lived in London, but I'm from a tiny little town, really a village, where everyone knows each other. I won't say which one for obvious reasons, but it's in the English county of Surrey, and it's boring. I don't really know why I don't explore my own town much, but my mother thinks it's an Aspie thing. I know where to go, and I just go there. Going to the park for a kickabout? Head left, then go straight. Train station? Head left, then take another left. School? That was bus stop B. Head left and take a right. We weren't far from the epicenter of our town, if you could call it that. And as far as I was aware, there was nothing on the other side apart from a few rows of semi-detached houses. Of course, that was before I met Luke. Luke moved over from North London 3 years ago when we were both 15. His parents were one of so many couples who decided to move out of London during COVID. They moved in summer so Luke could settle in before starting sixth form, which if you're not from the UK is basically the last 2 years of school, and the only bit that's optional. Me and my two mates, Tom and Liam, met Luke in the park on a swelteringly hot day, inviting him to join us for a kickabout that only lasted about 20 minutes before we surrendered to the heat and sat in the shade, pumping him with questions as rural kids inevitably will when encountering anyone new. He was a fun guy to be around, the kind of guy who would never take the piss out of you for no reason, but would roast you back mercilessly if you tried to do the same. We walked back to his parents' house with him, and I found out that he was only a couple of roads away from me. We were neighbors. His road was quiet and peaceful, with nice cars on the driveways and slightly bigger houses than down our way. I didn't tell Luke that I'd never been down his road before. He had a PS5 and his parents were really nice, so we decided to stick around and texted our parents to say we'd be back late. We played FIFA for a while in a round robin, and when it wasn't my turn, I alternated between watching and looking out of the window. The house directly opposite his caught my eye. It looked slightly older than his parents' house, with fading brickwork, but that wasn't what drew my attention to it. Even though it was still a while until sunset, someone was systematically closing every window on the front-facing side of the house. I saw the same arm, its owner obscured behind net curtains, reaching out to close each window before making a hand movement that quickly interpreted as locking it. This strange little ceremony started in the living room, then progressed to the kitchen. Then there was a pause. I interpreted this as the occupant going to the back windows to do the same. Then it resumed upstairs. Before long, every window in the house was closed and locked, the curtains closed, and the house dead. After about 20 minutes, I saw a very faint glow coming from the living room windows. The occupant had turned the lights on. Everything about this felt wrong. For one, we were in the middle of a heat wave. For the last few nights, my room had transformed into a sweaty hot box, and I'd lay awake, uncomfortably melting. Not to mention that this was in the height of COVID, where people were keeping their windows open in the dead of winter, let alone a boiling summer evening. I stared at the house for a few moments, wondering how stuffy and uncomfortable it must have been at the moment. "Luke," I said, nudging him as he played, "who lives across the road?" "Which one?" he asked, not turning around as he skillfully moved past the defense as Mbappe. "The one with the big oak tree outside or the one with the red curtains?" "Red curtains. Don't know. Gotta look at him once. Old guy. Beard. Keeps to himself." "Does he always keep his windows closed? Curtains drawn?" "Yeah. Does it every night," he said, pausing the game and looking at me with that excited look people give you when you've noticed the same thing they have. Tom, who by all accounts was about to concede a goal as Juventus, gave a little what-the-hell shrug. "I've watched him a couple of times." "Must be boiling in there," said Liam, his attention now drawn to the window. But he turned away. Liam never had a great attention span. I kept staring at the house. It had signs of life inside. After about 20 minutes, a faint light came on in the kitchen, then went off after a few minutes. I kept watching the house as the sun started to set. Then my attention got diverted as Tom nudged me to tell me it was my turn. For one reason or another, I find it very easy to get fixated on something, and much harder to take my mind off it. I've got mild Asperger's and self-diagnosed OCD, so take your pick. From there on, whenever I went round to Luke's house, sometimes with the others and sometimes alone, I'd stare at the house and watch the little pre-sunset ritual. It was clockwork, always around 25 minutes before sunset, even as summer drew to a close and night fell earlier and earlier. Luke hadn't taken as much of an interest in it, but he was polite enough to indulge mine. He'd seen the man a few times now, and told me that he got a food delivery every 3 weeks or so, but that was the only time he saw him leave the house. One Saturday morning in September, I managed to get a look at this firsthand. The delivery driver was waiting at least 3 or 4 minutes when the door opened. An older man, in his late 70s maybe, opened the door and walked straight out onto the threshold. He looked like he'd had a few hard years. His skin, even from across the road, looked rough and coarse. His hair was dirty gray and too long for a man his age, coming down to the nape of his neck. He had a thick, ragged beard of the same unsightly color. He was wearing a vest that showed off a surprisingly wiry physique for a man of his age, as well as some mildewy-looking pajama bottoms. What really stood out about him, though, were his eyes. Even from my distant vantage point, I could see that they had a burning energy about them, and the delivery driver, who'd no doubt been about to voice a complaint of being kept waiting for so long, visibly took a step back. The old man's eyes never left the driver as he picked up the shopping, then promptly retreated inside, closing the door immediately behind him. The driver, taken aback, paused for a few moments and took off, heading out the gate much faster than he'd entered. As the school year started and the seasons took a slow slide from summer to autumn, then finally winter, my attention waned when it came to Luke's strange neighbor. His window routine became just another thing happening in the background, just like everything else that could happen in a nothing town like ours. That was until a month ago. Luke and I, now gangly 18-year-olds, had been at the pub celebrating our last exams. Our A-levels, a major set of tests that happen at the end of the sixth form, and basically determine which university you can get into. We'd gone back to his to have a few more beers and play some of his newer games. In the 3 years since the two of us had first met, Tom had moved away, and Liam had fallen in with some of the rougher kids at school, thinking he was a roadman and giving us a wide berth. It was getting late and I was thinking of going home. I had my phone resting on the windowsill and I grabbed it to check the time, when I saw a figure running full pelt down the road. It was the old man, moving with a speed I'd have barely thought credible, his movements seeming to match a younger man. He ran until he got to his house, slamming the gate behind him before unlocking the door in record speed and squeezing himself into it before closing up. I summoned Luke over silently, and we watched the house for the next 20 minutes, neither of us saying a word, too gripped by fear to make a sound. A few lights went on in the surrounding houses, probably people woken up by the loud closing of the gate and the door. But the old man's house stayed completely pitch black and silent. "What the fuck was that?" Luke said, breaking the deathly silence. "What was he running from?" I asked, knowing how freaked out my voice sounded. "There's an Alsatian a few doors down," he said, scanning the street. "Big beast, bad temper." "If you run from a dog, it'll chase you," I replied, my eyes fixed on the house opposite. Still no signs of life. "Liam?" he asked uncertainly. "He's a little shit, but he wouldn't mug an old man." "What about his mates, though?" "I don't think so." My voice was tense, hollow. I had a horrible feeling on my mind. We sat there for half an hour scanning the road. Then I headed back, looking up and down the street. An eerie silence fell over the whole place, and I shivered in spite of the hot summer night. All the house lights were off now down the road, the occupants deciding to sleep now the commotion had passed. I got to my parents' house and turned in, my sleep uneasy. I woke up around noon, "Hey, you did it too when you were on summer holidays," and headed downstairs, deciding that I had to tell my parents about this. Not for them to march over and get to the bottom of a situation, but because they were surprisingly good sounding boards whenever I had an obsession or neurosis bubble over. I once spent 2 weeks prodding and fretting over what I thought was a new dark mole on my shoulder, only for Mum to tell me with an eye roll that it was a birthmark. I saw her in the kitchen with Gary, our new neighbor, a meek-looking man of around 40 years old. Gary was a boring guy, possibly on the low end of the spectrum like me, and hadn't said much of a word to anyone since he'd moved in, until my parents had sort of taken him under their wing. He wore what I'd already sussed was his favorite t-shirt, a faded dark AC/DC shirt that had clearly once been black but was now a dull gray. "Morning, love," said Mum, sipping a milky cup of tea. "You get in late?" "Yeah, proper late," I said, joining them. Normally I'd wait until Gary was gone, but he was nice enough and would probably be a fairly sensible sounding board. "Listen, I was at Luke's house last night and I saw something weird." I paused. "You know that house opposite him? Old man, red curtains." "Yeah," Mum said, nodding. "I mean, I know the house. I've never met the owner. He has this bizarre ritual before sunset. All the house windows get closed, curtains drawn, complete blackout." "I think some old people do that," said Gary mildly. "They treat it as a daily job, because otherwise they'll forget. Probably leave a door open somewhere, get burgled. Though no way you'd catch me closing the windows around this time of year." "It's bloody hot," said Mum. "He did it in the height of COVID too," I said. "He's probably an eccentric," said Mum, "or he gets cold." "Last night I saw him," I said, my voice dropping, "running down the road like his fucking life depended on it. I couldn't move that fast if I tried." "Well, you do need some exercise," Mum said, flashing me a cheeky grin. "You don't get anything from running in computers. You should get down the park. Play football or something." "He wasn't running to keep fit," I replied. "He was being chased." "Chased? Chased by who?" "I don't know, but I stopped. Something Mum said having tripped something off in my brain. I forced an awkward smile and a shrug. "He probably was out jogging," I said, trying to sound sincere. "One of my little notions, I guess." Mum chuckled and patted my shoulder. "It happens, love. Do you want a cup of tea?" "Nah, I left my coursework at Luke's last night," I lied, getting up. "Thought you were done with all that." "Yeah, but I want a copy in case they lose it. I'll be back in a couple." I gave her a kiss on the cheek, then after a few paces turned back. "See ya, Gary," I added, having forgotten he was there. They both waved me off, and I headed right back to Luke's, checking Google Maps on the way just to check a hunch from what I could see of the space past the old man's house. Luke, who was still half asleep by the look of things, didn't seem like he'd slept great either. "You okay, mate?" he said when I knocked on his bedroom door. "You forgot something." "Have you got an old football somewhere?" I asked, cutting him off quickly. Probably," he said, puzzled. "Maybe in the shed." We headed into his back garden to grab an old football that was tucked neatly under 2 cobwebby boxes of bric-a-brac. Luke didn't ask any questions as I took it, and we headed out onto the road. We walked down the road and took a sharp right. Mine being a small town, many of the houses didn't back onto anything other than road or open spaces. The side road was bordered by fences on all sides, and we quickly identified the old man's house from the rolled red curtains. I looked up at it. I couldn't see the garden through the fence, but I could see the back of the house. The brickwork here was even more decrepit, and there was ivy that looked overgrown. I placed the ball gently on the ground and chipped it over the fence, hearing it land in the neighbor's garden with a very soft thud. Luke gave a groan in protest but cut it off, realizing the game plan. I raced back round to the front of the house and knocked on the door, hearing the sound reverberate inside. There was nothing for a few minutes. Then I heard a strange sound that I immediately recognized as latches or locks, at least 5 or 6 of them, being unlocked. Then the door swung open, and I was greeted with the face that I remembered so well. His eyes blazed harder than usual, no doubt because I was an unscheduled visitor. "What?" he demanded coarsely. His accent was pure old-school East London, the kind of guttural rasp that was the staple of British gangster films. He didn't take his eyes off me for a second. "Hey," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Sorry, me and my mate were kicking a ball around and I think it went in your back garden. Have you seen it?" "No, fuck off." He was every bit the charmer I imagined him to be. "Do you mind if I come over and grab it? I'll be out of your hair in 2 minutes." "You're not coming through this house," he said as if I'd mortally offended him. His face was full of indignant rage, but within a second it changed, and a sort of strange realization came over his hawkish features. "What do you want?" he asked, putting an insane emphasis on the "you." "I told you my Don't act bloody stupid with me," he roared. "It's you. You're always watching my house." A chill went down my neck. Of all the times I'd stared at the place, I never considered the idea that its owner was staring back at me. Not for a while," I said, trying to find my words. "Yeah, but you're here now, aren't you?" he asked nastily. "It's just... I saw you last night," I said, a tiny bit of confidence creeping into my voice. "You looked scared." He paused for a moment. "You see a lot, don't you?" "I see a lot, too." Another pause. "Right. Normally, I'd tell you if you so much as look at my house again, I'll kill you. But there's a situation, and I need eyes." He gestured for me to come in. I looked back at Luke, who was standing about 50 steps back, giving a quick shake of my hand to tell him not to worry. Once I was in, he started the complex process of locking the deadbolts on his front door. I'd counted wrong. He had 8. The first thing I noticed about his cramped hallway was the humidity. It hit me as soon as the door closed, stifling and unpleasant. The next thing I noticed were the wooden crosses. There were 6 of them lining each side of the hallway, each of them identical in design, and each looking like they'd been made in a garden shed on a boring afternoon. Most religious folk, my parents included, had a crucifix somewhere within easy viewing, but to have 6 in such rigid formation was a strange sight. He directed me into the living room, and the crosses became normal by comparison. Every inch of the room, including every patch of wall and most of the hardwood floor, was wallpapered by yellowed newspaper articles. This wasn't some artsy custom design. It was strikingly clear that every single one of them had been hand-stuck. Some looked like major newspapers, all the physical paper, no printouts of online articles, but some were local papers, including one that was published right here in town. The headlines tended towards the morbid, and had a strange focus on missing persons article. Hikers going off on solo trails and not coming back. Kids snatched in the dead of night. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. This didn't feel like some armchair detective. It felt more like a serial killer keeping the reporting of his work like some trophy. The rest of the room was just as humid as the hall and decrepit, with a sofa that looked like it survived the Blitz, and an armchair with probably more mildew stuffed inside its fibers than my whole house combined. The old man directed me to the armchair and I sat down, fear making my heart pound, wondering whether I should make a run for it and try to throw open the deadbolts before he charged out to grab me. "I grew up in Mile End," he said gruffly, sitting down on the sofa. Old terraced council house in one of the roughest roads in the area. People going missing or ending up dead over some small feud or winding up the wrong person. Whole families packing up without a buy-your leave. It's the exact kind of place where people can disappear. It's the kind of place they thrive. They? Who are they? "If I say it, you'll think I'm mad," he said, and I repressed the chuckle that had been rising. "You're a bright kid. You like to observe just like I used to, so you tell me." I thought about everything so far, why he'd reacted so poorly to me asking to come in, the deadbolts, the crosses on the wall. If they existed, I'd say it was vampires. I said, unable to suppress the laugh that came with my words. He stared me dead in the face, those burning eyes not wavering for a second. But come on, I continued. You're not telling me that you close all your windows every night because of Count Dracula? He laughed too, a rasping giggle completely devoid of mirth or warmth. Count fucking Dracula, he said. Is that what you think a vampire is? Some suave aristo in a cape? He reached for something on the cluttered coffee table and thrust it into my hand. It was a Polaroid. I turned it over to reveal the photo, and my veins pumped with ice. My hand started to shake so badly I almost dropped the photo, and my heart pounded with pure, unrelenting fear. This is AI, said a voice that sounded like mine. It's a 20-year-old Polaroid. I thought you were observant, he said. But you must have. It's not possible. What the fuck is that? My hand still shaking, I raised the photo up and forced myself to study it in more detail. It showed someone that might have once been a man, but whose features were warped beyond all measure. His eyes were the first terrible detail that I noticed. They were jet black, but they weren't smooth like a demon in a Shyamalan. They were bulbous and fleshy, and seemed to bulge outwards. Those are its pupils, said the old man. When the hunger gets to them, the pupils swell up and expand over its eyes like a massive fleshy sty. But it's not blinded, not by a long shot. Nausea rose up in my throat to join the thick cloud of fear that already dwelt there. Does it hurt him? It, and worse than anything you could imagine. I next looked to the creature's mouth, and the urge to throw up intensified. Lining the creature's mouth were strange needles that protruded horribly from what were otherwise human teeth, thinner than a syringe. But like a syringe that you've accidentally dropped needle first on the floor, every single one of them was bent and twisted horribly. Those are how it feeds, he continued, seeing my eyeline move down. Same time as the pupils swell up, these things slide out of the teeth. They start straight. Then a few bites down, they start to catch and bend. The rest of the creature's features were relatively unremarkable. It was pale, but not insanely so, and its head had mats of lanky black hair. I feel like every second I stared at the photo brought me closer to panic, but I forced myself to put it down and engage my brain. There's no way this thing exists, I said, more to myself than the old man. It would be on the internet within days, and even if all this goes away after it's fed, there's no way this sort of monstrosity could go back to looking like a human. You'd be surprised, he said. I've got loads of photos of vampires in their normal form, but only a few in this state. Lucky for me, that whole thing about photos and reflections isn't true. The only thing that marks them out is their eyes. After a couple of years, all that trauma scratches their iris until it's more or less blood red. So what do? They wear contacts? I said, the levity of the joke dying in my mouth. Exactly, he said. It's the only thing that works. From everything I've seen before, contact lenses and sunglasses, but those always attract attention when worn at night. One of the hardest parts of a vampire's life was hiding their eyes. It's why they're so much bolder than they used to be, and why they hide in plain sight instead of lurking in damp caves. What do you mean, hide in plain sight? It's the way for them now. They move around under different identities, blend in. People invite them in, make them a cup of tea, then come back when you're asleep. Or if they can't get invited, they try to rig the game with loopholes. Anything that could count as an invitation, an open window. A realization hit me like an electric shock. That's why Yeah. Back when I was a kid, my sister, she was ill, not the type of ill you recover from. She was hot all the time. She'd sleep with her window wide open in the dead of winter just to cool down. Then one night, one took her. I'm so sorry, how? I paused. How did you know it was a vampire? I killed it, he said. Tracked it down and killed it. It was weak. My sister's illness had done that when he drained her dry. I had about 50 questions rising to the surface. each resting on the lunatic presumption that what he was telling me was fact. Eventually, I narrowed it down to one that had burned on my brain since I'd walked in. "You said there was a situation," I said finally. "You could say that. One of them's here." Although the rational part of my brain still rejected everything he had to say as nonsense, I still felt an intense pang of fear grip me. "Here? In town?" "Right here. It hasn't struck yet. It always waits a little while before starting its nasty work. If people go missing as soon as it moves to town, there's questions asked." "So how do you know one's here?" He reached for a freezer bag on the floor nearby and handed it to me. For a second, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then my brain processed it, and I let out a horrified, nauseated groan. The bag was full of contact lenses, each of them caked in blood. I dropped it on the floor, telling myself I'd use a bucket of hand sanitizer once I got out. "Only early warning sign you get," he said. "Right now it's hungry. It's getting pangs and transformations most nights. It stalks the night looking for easy opportunities, and as it gets hungrier, it has to keep going through these in case it's spotted." He gave an unpleasant grimace, no doubt imagining with horror the scene of a vampire shedding contact lenses like snakes shed their skin, just like I was. "I know you think it's bullshit, but I want you to do something for me," he continued. "Watch." "Watch?" I repeated, puzzled. "Yeah. Just like you watched my house, watched me. Apply that to your road. Whenever you're about to go to bed, just watch your street for, 10 minutes or so. Vampires move around a lot. They'll comb a whole town in a night looking for an opportunity to feed quietly, or to scope out future victims." There wasn't much to say after that, so I headed off, telling the full story to Luke, who'd clearly been on the verge of dialing 999. I raced home, Mum not saying much when I washed my hands for 5 minutes straight. She probably wrote it off as a random OCD moment. I spent the rest of that day doing some pre-uni reading, then played on the PS4 until around midnight. Then, scolding myself for giving fantasy even a moment of my time, I went and sat in front of my window, gently prising the net curtains to one side. I didn't stay there for long. It was 20 minutes at the most. My bedroom window directly overlooked the road, and I got a good look at whoever was coming and going. No one did. My town shuts down long before midnight. It wasn't until I was completely convinced that there was nothing or no one passing through that night that I folded the net curtains back over and went to bed. I don't exactly know why I did it, but I returned to that spot at around the same time the next night, and the next night after that. Soon I'd been doing it as a strange little habit for a little over 3 weeks, always starting at the same time and finishing at more or less the same. When I finished, I felt like a night watchman who'd done his duty and was off shift. I never saw anything, of course. Well, nothing sinister. I saw foxes and the occasional neighbor going out to do the bins. But despite staring out into that empty darkness night after night, and almost hoping I'd see something out of place, I never did. Until 2 nights ago. It was just when I was first starting to think about turning in. I'd woken up early the night before, having nightmares of strange black-eyed figures gathered on the road in dark hoods, and I was tired. I gave a long scan of the view outside my window, and this time saw a lone figure walking on the other side. It wasn't his gait, which was slightly unusual in a weak, shuffling way, that instantly unnerved me. It was the fact that he bent over and clutched his head with his hands. This wasn't a drunk stumbling home and regretting life choices. This was a person in terrible pain. It was a he, though I couldn't make much out of him in the pitch black. Did not scream or wail, but the way his whole body shook told me that this was a man in silent agony. After a few terrible moments, he was done, and dropped something on the floor with disregard. I sat there watching in stunned silence as the figure resumed its awkward stride. I felt a loud, rhythmic thudding, and I realized it was my heart pounding. Once he was out of my eye line, I crept downstairs, my parents both being sound asleep. I opened the front door as delicately as I could, taking pains not to close it hard before I made my slow way across the road, checking the coast was clear of the figure before I got to the other side, He'd dropped a bloody contact lens. Every rational part of myself scrambled for reasons and justifications, but they were all silenced in an instant. I could feel myself hyperventilate and shake as I stared down at that loathsome object, willing myself to shine a light on it so I could confirm it was some innocuous debris that just looked like a bloody contact lens. But I didn't. Instead, I took off in the direction of the figure, forcing my legs, which felt like jelly, to move. I got to a three-way turn at the end of my road and panicked slightly, wondering if I'd lost the strange figure. But a small movement in the corner of my eye on the left kept me focused, and I pursued the figure quietly as it made its way down the road. As I continued, I saw where the figure had decided to head. At the end of the road there were two massive oak trees, and between them was a footpath leading to a rickety turnstile. Beyond the turnstile was open woods, an easy place to disappear especially after dark, and I wouldn't have followed them into those woods if my life depended on it. I crouched by one of the trees as I saw the figure approaching the turnstile. Most of its features were obscured in darkness, but I got a chill as I saw the way it mounted the turnstile. It did so in a way that was equivalent to hauling its limbs at great effort onto the decrepit structure. As it swung a leg over the gap, I waited for it to haul the other one over and make the crossing. But it didn't. It stopped midway, stood statue still atop the turnstile for a few seconds. It seemed to be scanning its surroundings, and I heard what sounded like a loud, distinctive sniff. Then it turned its head in my direction, my heart thumping like an intense bass coming from a car's subwoofer. I shifted my head slightly, concealing myself from view behind the tree, trying to still get a view of the figure through a small gap in the tree. I couldn't see much. Terror gripped every single string of muscle in my body, and I fought the urge to start running. The figure dismounted the turnstile and walked a few awkward steps back down the footpath. I couldn't bear to move a muscle. It stopped around 5 meters from me and stood deathly still. Then I heard another terrible sniff. I tried to see the creature's face, and while it was too dark to make its features out, I knew it would have looked like the Polaroid I'd seen. After a terrible few moments, the creature turned on its heel and went back to the turnstile. I stayed completely still as it crossed into the woods and disappeared from sight, then stayed in that position for at least 10 more minutes, convinced that if I moved so much as a muscle, that unknown horror's head would reappear from the side of the turnstile, and those horrific needle teeth would clamp around my neck as I screamed in agony. Once I was convinced that the vampire wasn't coming back, I shakily forced myself up and made my way home. It wasn't until I was at the end of the road that my knees buckled in terror, forcing me to grab onto a brick wall, as something clicked for me that hadn't at first. It's the same thing that gives me uncontrollable shakes even when writing this a day later. It was the realization that, while the creature's face had been in complete darkness, I actually got a slight look at his clothes, and more specifically, his top half. He was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt.